I'm gonna get emotional. I don't know how to, until I get over the jitterbugs here, because I'm not a speaker, you know, I just don't. This makes me nervous being up in front of this big of a crowd. Once I get going, I'll be all right. I'd like to introduce one of my several of my nephews that come down. If Arnold will stand up. Avery, he's in the back. These two nephews are my oldest sisters. Arnold's the oldest boy, and Avery's, I believe, the third oldest boy. She had 7 children. These are 2 of the boys. I have another cousin, Randy. Would you stand up? So a lot of you might know Randy. He's been involved over in the Seattle area working with different organizations over there, and he's working on a book right now. It's going to be coming out maybe the end of the year. Did I understand that? It's he's working with Bill Lehman on telling the story of some of the petroglyphs and stuff that were located down along the Columbia River and stuff. And he's got some pretty good stories, and we've been visiting that one. I also want to acknowledge some of my extended family that traveled here, and they've had family members from within the Kittitas Valley. One of my other cousins, would you stand up? Just let them know. She's one of the SoHappy families. Cousin there. LJ, will you stand up? I want to acknowledge you just because I appreciate you showing up. LJ, I'm touched. Or Larintha. These are some of the family members, extended family members and stuff and I have another gentleman I would like to introduce because I only met him about a year ago, and I found out some information. We are related, and I didn't know that, and I'll try and fill in some of that story. We'll stand up back there with the glasses, like Gilbert King George. Thank you. I've got an excuse. I reached that age where it's just like a brain fart. Okay, so I guess that's all. If I forgot, if someone else. Haley and Darcy, I would like Haley stand up. This is one of my. This would be my great niece. It'd be my second oldest sister's granddaughter. That would be Joanne Nason. This would be her granddaughter. And that's her mother sitting next to her, Darcy. And I don't know where her dad is. Also like to introduce Emily Washeen. She's been working on some projects. So with that, I guess that'll take care of all my Kalia. She's one of our extended family. Carol. So, with that, I'll try and get started. This is the first time I've ever done a PowerPoint, so I'm not sure whether I can figure out how to do this, but I should, hopefully. In the beginning, I guess our family has started up on our present day allotments. Our family is one of the few families that got to stay in the Kittitas Valley and actually live on our original allotments. And those allotments were located up in the Nanum Canyon. And at one time in the Nanum Canyon, there was a large Indian encampment. Right where our allotment was at, on the one deal, we had as many as 5 longhouses there. And those extended families that was there. And some of you, if you go up in there, our present day allotments, they run from what is now known as Charlton Road. When you come across Charlton Road, once you cross the Nanum Creek at the bridge there, or Nanum-Wilson Creek, it's 2 creeks combined. Once you get to the corner, the stop sign of the Nanum and Wilson Creek stop sign there. Our allotments run from there up north to the substation, and we got both sides of the road. But at one time, our family members, some of those, when they give us those allotments, there was a census taken. And when they did a census, they rounded up all the Indians and wherever he was at the time. I guess that's where he was considered Kittitas or whatever, if he was in there. They gave him an allotment, and those allotments were 160 acre allotments to every tribal member. And the reason they did this census back there was so they could find out how many Indians there were and determine, okay, if we give everybody 160 acres, once we get done with that, anything left over would be considered excess land, and that came about in that Homestead Act. And then anything after that, they opened it up for homesteading. So, because of our allotments, but originally our extended family and the number of people we had there, originally a lot of our allotments, we went from the Nanham Road clear over to the Wilson Creek Road up there. Originally it was, and the Charlton Road, back when I was growing up, was not called Charlton Road. Part of that, it was called the Farrell Road, because there was it was named after a lawyer at that time in this valley named Billy Farrell. And our allotments went across there, but Billy Farrell was given, he was the executor of one of our family members' allotments. She passed away, and guess who got the allotment? It went into Billy Farrell, and so he owned that property. And later it changed hands and went into a family name of Blattners, and since then it's changed the number of heads. But our property over the years, we've lost a lot of those trust properties. So if you come up there, but Owhi was living on that property. If you look at an early survey, it was done in 1850, around 1855 by a man by the name of Snow. You'll show that he had it's right there. It would have been located off of Charlton Road on the south side of Charlton Road. He had an orchard planted there, and that was, they called it Owhi Gardens at that time. And that piece of property to the south of Charlton Road used to be one of our allotments also, and a man by the name of Charlie Bragg somehow traded old man Nason, got him drunk or something, and they traded for a white horse, and that 320 acres was taken out of our allotment. But part of that allotment on that south side there was a family cemetery too. And on that hill there's still four bodies of the Nason family. There's William Nason, Boston Nason, and I forget the other two's names. I'm starting to forget that. But anyway, that's where it started and the Nason family was living there. In order to get to my mother now, on the other hand, was actually born in Cashmere. She was a Wenatchee Indian. And she was living in the Cashmere area, or the Wenatchee area, the Leavenworth area up there. And that was originally a reservation up there also, the Wenatchee Reservation. But when Governor Stevens was trying to put a railroad through there, he hired a bunch of surveyors, and they changed the boundaries of that deal, and they moved those people from the Wenatchee Reservation off. And then that's when they took a lot of those people up in that area, and they took half of them to the Colville Reservation, and the other half was brought down here to the Yakima Reservation. So my mother was brought down here to the Kittitas Valley. She had an aunt and an uncle that lived on the lower River Bottom Road, and they had an allotment down there. And right now I still have that allotment, and that's where my mom's aunt and uncle lived. It's part of, you have to go through the Atchison place to get down to those allotments, and we've got Atchison's have leased that land for years. Mom leased leased it to him, and it's part of his operation down there. But to go back, the one gentleman I introduced to you earlier, King George, we was talking, and okay, talk the one. I was talking this. My mom's aunt and uncle that allotment was under a George Smith. They called him George Smith. He had arthritis. He was really getting old. He had arthritis so bad he couldn't walk. He was crippled. They had to pack him around. And my mom's aunt was getting up there in years too, and she couldn't do it. So my grandma, she told my mom that she was going to have to stay there and take care of her uncle and help her out. So that's where my mom stayed at. And Grandma had an allotment over in Cook Creek, and I'll come along. But I was going to go back to this King George. I guess they changed his name from King George to George Smith. And it turns out that he's from the Muckleshoot Reservation. He was one of the tribal councilmen over there. That was his uncle. That was my mom's uncle. Somehow he married into that family. So that's how I found out. And like I said, I didn't meet him until about a year ago. He come up to my place and started sharing some stories, and we finally made the connection. And one thing that we found out about all of this for us, I was the baby of the family. And so I guess I'll back up a little bit since I got this. This picture right here, you see on this picture right here is actually a picture of my great-grandmother who had her teepee and stuff, and this was located at the present-day rodeo grounds. That's where her allotments were at. She owned the present-day the rodeo grounds. And the other picture over there is my grandma. This is old Julie, and then this was young Julie. This was taken over at Cook Creek at her house over there. Because of the Homestead Act, one way that the Homestead Act caused quite a bit of problems on these allotments, because at the time, us Indians and stuff, they traveled, they followed the season. So when they left their allotment, they may have left their teepee poles or something back. Once they left, the homesteaders would come in and they'd say, oh, they didn't see anybody around. They might notice some teepee poles or they might not. But so they'd come and they'd say, oh, this looks like a good piece of ground. So they'd build houses on it. So because of that started some of our people to start building stick houses. So that they could hang on to those allotments, or at least let people know that piece of ground was settled and it belonged to somebody. So when they went to the river, or if they went to the Lower Columbia fishing or something, they could come back and have a house or have a place to stay. This is another teepee, or another picture of great grandma at the rodeo grounds. Oops, it didn't go. Oh, this picture here was taken. This was the original log cabin that was located at where I present day live up in the Nanum. But this log cabin and stuff, there was a fire that started down on Thomas Road, and it burnt all the way up through the Nanum, up through the Nanum basin there, and burnt with number. And it burnt those log cabins out, and so that's why we had to move to where we're located at now at home. This is after that. This is when those log cabins burned down. This was the old house that they put up, and most of this lumber was kind of pieced together. It was pieces of lumber that. The Knutson lumber mill, it used to be located on the Kittitas highway. When they was cutting boards and stuff, they allowed our family to go back there and just pick boards out. It was boards that they couldn't sell. They said they could have it. So Grandpa and all of them went out there and they'd get these pieces of boards, and they put together best they could with whatever lumber they could take out of there to build a stick house. This other house, this was a double house. When my sister moved up there or something, they put this house in there so that my nephews and all them would have a place to stay, because this old house was just 2 rooms. It was 1 bedroom, a kitchen, and a bedroom, and then an upstairs. And most of us, at that time, like I said, my mom had 7 kids, or 6 kids. I was the 7th, being the youngest. This here is where the old house, we moved it. It's when we moved it, we took this is a pump house here. We moved that house to a little field in back, and then we added on to it, to the present day house where I'm living at now. This was, this picture here was a picture of my mom when she was younger. And this right here is a picture of her sister-in-law, Lucy Nason. She married my mother's brother, Ed Walsh. He was actually Edward Joseph, but he was one that was living in, he was a Kashmir, and they took him to the Omak mission. And while he was up in the Omak mission, what they did to all those Indians that went up there, they changed their names because they supposedly, because they couldn't pronounce their name, they had to change their names. And when they changed their names, they had to they took names of the presidents and put it in a hat, and they drew them out. Now, that's where we get the Cleveland name. My nephew and them, they got the Cleveland name because they drew out President Cleveland. And that's why we're the real Cleveland Indians. Now, here's a picture. There's my mom's brother, Edward Walsh. He was Edward Joseph. His father was Charlie Joseph, and he was actually the chief of the Snoqualmies. He lived at Snoqualmie Falls. His allotment was at Snoqualmie Falls. He lived right there where the interpretive center is at, and when you walk out that trail to go down to Snoqualmie Falls, when you got to the bottom of that trail down there, that's where he had his sweat house, sweat deal, and he used to sweat down there and stuff. But that was Edward Walsh. And Edward, as he grew up, he lived up in the Okanagan Valley. Actually, he lived. I found out. I always thought he started out at Malott, and they moved him from Malottville. But I was talking with Randy today and stuff. I didn't realize that he lived farther up the Meta, or farther up there, and then he moved to Malott, and then they eventually ended up in the Spelum. They got moved around. This picture here is my mother when she was gone. This would be Helen Nason, my oldest sister. That's Arnold's mother, Arnold Avery's mother. This was Minnie, and that was my brother Chuck, I believe. And this was old Julie when taken. This picture here was taken, this was young Julia Peters, and this was my grandfather, Grandpa Peters, and his old car, and they were over at their allotment was at Cook Creek there. This was my mother's first husband, Johnny Nason, or he was actually Johnny SoHappy. What happened was his father was George SoHappy. He come from the Wanapum area. George SoHappy. He took the Nason name because his mother passed away giving birth to him, and Charlie Nason raised him. So he took the Nason name, but he was actually Johnny SoHappy Nason. And this here, I believe this was my brother Chuck, but I'm not positive. Hey, Mom, I threw this in here because Mom was Mom was always telling stories, you know, when we get done. She'd sit around the table and we'd try to identify some of these old pictures that we had, try to find out who the people was, because she was starting to lose her eyesight there. And, you know, all of us got pictures and we just got them in boxes and nobody wrote the names of anybody on the back, and you'll always think you'll remember who they are. And I've done the same thing, and I've reached that point, and I understand where Mom was coming from now. I look at these pictures, and I'm lucky if I can even see the face. My eyes are blurry enough. The other thing is you sit there and think, who is that? But this picture here, I had to throw it up because I always liked this, because in our house on wash day, that was a real chore, because you had to pack the water from the creek, and that was my job. To pack the water, fill up these tubs, and Mom had this ritual. She had her own Maytag washer, but before the clothes ever got to the washing machine, they were cleaner than most people have. She had to wash them on that scrub board. And like I said, this was a ritual, and usually she'd scrub them there first, hand wash them, like, you know, and then before she put them in the Maytag washer, she had this old Maytag washer. So, like I said, it was always a ritual, but just looking at that brings back a lot of memories. Here's Uncle Ed again, and down in this lower picture, this picture here was at my oldest sister's funeral at our family cemetery. It was there, and this is Johnny SoHappy, and he was speaking then, and Uncle Ed had finished up speaking. This gentleman here in the middle was my Arnold's sister, his oldest sister Janice. That was her husband Bill Yosny. And some of you might know him. His family was from Cleellen. He lived in Cleellen. Now, Randy, one of my cousins, our family, my mom and his grandma, Agnes Miller, and Jerry Miller, Agnes, Lucy, and my mom was like the Three Musketeers. They did everything together. They were together all the time. And so we was always doing something with the Miller family. And this happens to be Sam Miller right here, and that's Randy's grandpa. Randy Lewis's grandfather, but he was from the Pateras, Entiat, up in that area. And they were taken over to the Mission Colville when they was taken out. Randy's family and stuff, Jerry Miller, they lived at Aswell, and when they put in the Aswell Dam, they flooded them out, so they were relocated from there. They had orchards in there. They were orchard people. This gentleman here is my oldest brother, Chuck Nason, and these two boys this is Jerome Whipple and Richard Whipple. Randy's mother was married to Bob Whipple, and these two are Randy's brothers, and unfortunately they're no longer with us. This picture here is a picture of Louis Winwhitey. And Louis Winwhitey, that was my grandma, Julie, brother, half-brother. Louis Winwhitey, the story behind him and his wife, Betty Steen. Louis Winwhitey was one that he was quite an alcoholic, and alcohol's been one of those problems in our family. You know, we've dealt with it and tried to cope, but he was a real bad alcoholic. And anyway, he got in a barroom fight here in Ellensburg, I think, somewhere in one of the deals, and he was stabbed. He got stabbed with a knife right in the groin. or Dylan, he was bleeding out. They took him to the hospital and tried fixing him up, and then I guess the gangrene or something started setting in, and there happened to be a minister that came in there and started going, and he was talking to Louis. Louis told him, he said, well, if your God will heal me, he says, then I'll go around and tell people about your God and quit drinking. Well, Louis, evidently that miracle happened for him. He was able to, he was able to save his leg because they were planning on cutting it off, and Louis wouldn't let him. He says, no, I was going to die a whole man, not a half a man. So that minister prayed over him, they did a deal, and so he wound up becoming a minister. And he was one of the people that went around and started different churches for the Indian people. He actually believed, he stuck to his word. That minister gave, and I believe the minister was from the Church of the Nazarene, which I found interesting because at that time most of the churches and stuff in this area was either Catholic or Protestant. This picture over here is a picture of Minnie. She was the princess. I can't remember the name of this lady here, but this is my brother, my youngest brother, John Nason. And this little boy, the blonde-headed boy, he was part of our family all the time, I guess. And most of you will know him as Jerry Sanders. My brother and Jerry Sanders were real brothers. And that was taken at the rodeo grounds. When we had the open village, at that time when the village took up most of the whole rodeo ground area. Here's great grandma again at the ranch, at the house. She come up to visit her grandchildren and stuff. And here's a picture of George SoHappy. George SoHappy, I was telling you, was father to Johnny Nason. But George used to spend a lot of time up at the ranch with Grandpa Pete and us. And when I was growing up, I was fortunate enough to get to meet him and get to sit down and listen to what he had to say. And that would be a relative to one of my cousins back here. These were some of the other pictures. This is Ed again, and these were two of the people that were from here in Kittitas. They lived out towards Thorpe. And these two ladies were from Momo. They were from White Swan, and they happened to be up here. They come from Momo, and I don't know the names of them. There was nothing. Mom didn't remember who they were. So I'm not sure who they are. This picture here was taken in, I believe, about 65. My brother John, he was the youngest brother until I came along. And these were his kids, and he wanted to take his kids, Toby, Guy, Nick, over to see where Grandpa lived at. So we went over to the old place in Cook Creek. This was the house, and this was a root cellar that my grandpa built. And I was over there here not too long ago, and this thing's almost down. It has almost fell completely down. And then some of you probably knew my brother. This is Bill Nason. He was the second, the oldest brother, and he was married. And he was married to a woman by the name of Ida Searcy. And so a lot of people used to get Ida Searcy because she married Bill Nason, Ida Nason. She'd get Ida Nason mixed up with my mother, Ida Nason. But my brother's wife. This here happens to be where I come into the picture at. That was my father, Johnny Aronica. Tony and his family came into the U.S. and he got a homestead down in. He lived down at below Vantage there. Actually, now it's down there where the fruit company's at. He had a homestead down there, 80 acres. Tony and his brother Sam Aronica came over together, and they worked for the railroad, and they worked enough till they could get enough money so they could send back over home and get his mom and his father and them over and the rest of his family over. So it took them a while to do it, but while they was living down there on the Columbia River there at their homestead, at that time there was a lot of sheep ranches down there. There were some big sheep ranches. There was Sanders Sheep Ranch, Kern Sheep Ranch, and all those big sheep herders down there, that when they had their lambs, if they had twins and had trouble, the ewes had trouble with the twins, they'd just get rid of that one twin. And so my dad started out taking these bummer lambs, and he raised those bummer lambs, and before you knew it, he had a herd of over 1,000 head of sheep, and he started driving those sheep on free range at that time, and they'd come up through the Clockham and out that way and up across the top, up on the top of the Nanum Range and across, and they'd even go clear up into Easton and whatnot. But the way the story goes is that one time they were coming out, he was coming out of there with a big bunch of sheep, and it was getting late, and he stopped at their home place there, and at that time Johnny had passed away. Johnny Nason had passed away. He was killed in a car wreck on the Nanum Road. And Dad stopped and asked if he could rest the sheep there for the night, and she said yes, and there was a friend. And at that time, Mom was telling him about the fact that because Johnny passed away, the county was coming back after her for taxes on that property, because they found out that that was a homestead, and they found this piece of paper that went clear back to the date of that patent, which I think was like 1867, I'm not sure, on that bill. And somebody checked white homestead instead of an Indian homestead, and so the county was wanting taxes going clear back to the date on that, when they took that land out of trust. So my dad was telling her, don't lose that land. She didn't have any money. She said, what am I going to do? I don't have no money. I don't have enough money to, and I think it came to like $500. And at that time, back in that time, $500 was a lot of money. You could do a lot of stuff with $500 if you had it. So Mom said that what happened was that he left, and he went back down to where he was at, and he apparently sold a bunch of his sheep. And he took that, he sold I don't know how many head of sheep to get the $500, and he come back, and he gave it to Mom, and he told her, you can hang on to this land. He said, don't you lose it. So I don't know whether that was the start of the relationship or not. But somehow that's how my dad and I come in the picture. Well, when I come into the picture, she was past her childbearing age. She was both up around 65 or somewhere. And so I was out of the family. I'm the only one that was born in a hospital. And what I found out later is I found out that Mom had actually had a miscarriage. So I would have had an older brother had he lived. And that's why they made sure that, and she didn't go to the hospital with him. She tried to, because all of her other kids. Brother Bill was born on Skookum Mountain. They were picking huckleberries up there. And so he was born behind a huckleberry bush on the top of the mountain. Brother Chuck, he was born in a root cellar where the log cabins were at before they burned down. And I'm not sure where my sisters and them were all born at, but they were all born somewhere, because Mom was always doing something when she should have been taking care of her. She didn't lay down. This picture here was my brother Chuck, and that's him over there, and I put that there because this was after he came home from the service. But here he just got drafted into the Army, and he was gone for 7 years. And during that 7-year period, my brother and my mom didn't know where he was at. And what most people don't understand was, you always hear about the code talkers. And the code talkers, the Navajo code talkers, were some of the first, and under that. But what most people didn't understand is there was 18 different tribes that had tribal members that got attached with the code talkers. They actually worked with code talkers, but the Navajo code talkers, it was a top secret thing. And because he was Native American, he got attached to the code talkers. And that's why for 7 years, he couldn't write home, he couldn't do anything because it was a top secret thing. And so nobody knew where he's at. Mom tried for 7 years to try and find out where he's at. She didn't know whether he was alive or dead or what. And Chuck, during that time, he got awarded the Silver Star. He was captured by the Japanese twice and escaped. And I never did understand how come when he come home, he became an alcoholic. And it wasn't until I went to Vietnam did I understand what he was going through. And the demons that he was fighting with. In the military at that time, they didn't do anything for him. And he told me at that time, he said, this Silver Star, this Purple Heart, all these medals I got won't even buy you a cup of coffee in our local restaurant. And I found out that he was right. He was right. But he went through him. And while he was in there, he met another Indian from Oklahoma. And that gentleman come back, since he didn't have any family there in Oklahoma, he came home with my brother, and he settled here. And most of you locals, and some of y'all knew him as Russ Thompson. He lived in Thorne. And my brother would never talk about what he went through. But Russ shared with me some of the stories and some of the things he went through. He was quite a warrior. I don't know who this gentleman is. It was with my brother. Both Bill and them. These pictures were taken. All of us always worked and helped out Gil and Lily Pope. So this was taken up at the Pope Ranch. He was riding up there, usually fixing fence or something like that. But my brothers were always up there with Lily Pope. Here's a picture of my youngest sister. This one was Joanne when she graduated from Ellsworth High School. This picture right here is Mose, Cleveland, and Helen. This is Arnold's dad and my oldest sister. This picture here is Minnie Cleveland, and Helen and Minnie were your first rodeo queen and rodeo princess of the Ellsworth Rodeo in 1923. And that's the only time we've had any Native people as rodeo queen, rodeo princess for the Ellsworth Rodeo. This lady here is Mary Marchand, and she's Randy Lewis's mother. Here's some of the grandchildren. This was Mom with Arnold when he was young. And this is Janice, his oldest sister, with holding Arnold. This was taken at the ranch when Mom raised most of her grandkids up at the ranch. Arnold's got a story. I mean, his story and stuff when they was at the mission. They ran away from the mission because of the treatment that was taking place at the mission. He didn't want to stay there, so he came down. He was going to live with Grandma, so he came down to Grandma's place. He ran away from the mission at Omak, a St. Mary mission. But he's got some stories up there that will make your hair stand on end. These two ladies here, I'm not sure who these two ladies were, but they were from the valley, somebody from here in the Kittitas Valley. And this was Mom. Mom's the one that always told me we needed to share our culture with the people so they could get to understand us, to understand that we was just people too trying to survive. But she always held, usually all the schools in town would always have a field trip out to the ranch. And when they come up to the ranch for, especially usually when they had studying Indians, they'd always use us to come up, and Mom would share with them and show them baskets. These were some dried camas root and some other roots, big bilge or pounding bowl, and she would teach the young kids and stuff how they got along with where we got our food from. I guess I'm getting down. This picture here is taken from this one here is taken. I'm standing from my at our family cemetery at home now, and it's looking kind of northeast up in there. And the reason I show you that is back out in here. I told this story once before. This particular rock right here, this lava rock, tell you that this particular rock, it's a big lava rock, used to set way back up over in here. And the story behind this rock is great-grandma and them used to go up in this area and dig roots, different roots, camas root, maybe some bitter root, if it was coming, if you want to come in. And they'd always hike up there. When they'd hike up in here to dig these roots, they always carried some lunch with them and stuff, and maybe a little blanket and then some extra stuff, and they'd find a place to set that stuff down, and they'd lay it down. Well, one day they were up in this area here, and it was getting lunchtime, so they decided to take a break from digging, and there was 2 or 3 of them. There was, I think, great-grandma and grandma and some other ladies from up there. Because all the ladies dug roots for different feasts and stuff, so they're digging roots up here, and when it was lunchtime, they went over and they sat down and spread some paper. I was sitting there eating lunch, and as they was eating lunch and telling stories and talking with one another, they heard this sound coming through the air, this big whoosh, plunk, and all of a sudden this big rock just about landed on them, just about hit them. And they started looking around, and great-grandma goes, "Oh, sisters are fighting again." And they said, Grandma, I guess, asked her, "What sisters?" Well, she was talking about Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. And they were throwing rocks at each other. And you know, a lot of time, most of the people they talk about all these lava rocks coming from the Montana flow and stuff. And Mom said, "No, those rocks come from the sisters. When they'd fight, every time they'd fight, they'd throw rocks everywhere." And so this rock became the place that every year when they go dig roots, you had to go up and sit on this rock. So here a few years ago, under the field, they recovered a bunch of bodies that were in different colleges and different places, and they recovered about 45 different bodies, and we finally got them back under the Repatriation Act. And because of that, they made our cemetery, they asked me if we made it a repository for these bodies, these remains. And so I thought that we put them in there and we set some stones here. There's actually another grave there, but this one right here is the big one. There's 45 bodies in this particular thing. And so I put a couple of the big stones. There was some other lava rocks up there that Mom said it fell over the deal. And I put that one there, and I'm using those big stones as the marker for this because I thought it would be a good place for those to be for these elders who come back to their home country. Plus that, I figured that if something happened to me and my family, on Memorial Day, when we clean the graves and clean everything up, we can tell that story to keep that story alive. And at least they'd see it, because I'm not sure they'd ever find it up there if they didn't get to walk up there. Right? Young kids, or my nieces and nephews, they've grown up, moved in different areas. They don't get to come back up and see that area. But that rock, that lava rock there, was a story that was passed down from great-grandma. And then this other picture that I have here this summer, some of you know me, they had a I guess it was a reunion for the Catholic Church. And it was held in here, and they had, everybody showed up, anybody that attended the Lord's Academy showed up. And I came down to it for one reason, because I was talking the night before, and they had this. Punk Bender came over to me, and his wife, Beth, was in charge of putting this reunion on for the Catholic Church. But Punk come over and says, "Hey, Alan, you happen to know where that mission was located at up in the Nano?" And I told Punk, I says, I don't really know. I remember hearing about it, and the first time I heard about a mission being in the Nanum Canyon was during the water right hearings. I read something in some of the Aqua Vela cases where this mission and one of the water right claims was based on this mission. But I couldn't remember who it was that filed the claim, and I don't. So I thought, well, and when the way Punk talked, I thought he had found, that Beth had found a picture of this mission. But it turned out it wasn't a picture, it was a written description by one of the priests back then, and they were talking about this mission. And the reason they put that mission up there in the Nanum was because there was a large Indian population there, and they wanted to convert them to Christianity. And so they put that mission up there, and at that time, Nanum and Wilson Creek were two separate creeks. And they were taking water out of that Wilson Creek drainage, and that's to irrigate. They planted an orchard in there, and they planted they had a garden in there around that school. So that's where the water right came from. And it turned out when I was reading it, they said it was on the Bud Thomas property. Well, the Bud Thomas property happens to be right on our west boundary. You know, my mother took care of Bud Thomas. And when at that time, when they said there was a mission up there, I got thinking there had to be access off of what is present-day Charlton Road or something. They had to have a road or something to get back up to this property, because it's pretty much landlocked. And the only way you can get into it is either come through our property on the north end, part of our trust property, and go to the west, cross the main Nanum Creek, cross the Wilson Creek, because that was a separate channel, to get to this particular piece of property. So if they had a mission or school in there, they had to have some kind of road that went up there. But I'm not sure where it was located, because it's not there. Of course, that property's been sold and changed hands several times. It was part of the stuff on Charlton Road was that old Blattner place or Billy Farrell place. It was actually part of their lot. But this is so I went over there. I beat through the brush. I thought, well, I'm going to go look, because I always thought I'd seen some foundation. I thought the that it might be located on what they call the old Sherman place, which was up on the Pope Branch. And it's on the lower end of the Pope Branch, and I thought, because there was a house up there, but I'd seen some other foundations when I used to walk up there, and I thought, well, maybe that's where the mission was at. I didn't know. But I went over there and I took this picture because this is what's left of the Bud Thomas cabin. He lived there by himself, and that was there. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then his old bobsled that he used to pull in the winter to feed his cattle and stuff, and feed his brothers and there. Harry Thomas, they all lived down on Thomas Road. There was Harry and Tiny and I forget.
Howard.
What?
Howard.
Howard, yeah, got it. Anyway, they pull that bobsled down there during the winter and feed their cattle hay and stuff. But I just thought I'd show some of the people that it was on the end, and somebody had asked me about it, and I thought, well, I'll just show them kind of where the Bud Thomas property was located. But there's it now belongs to Bud Dunning, and he owns all that land up there. And so I never did find where the church was located. I mean, where that first school was located at, I couldn't find any foundation. But I didn't spend much time in there either because I was trespassing. I guess I'll show you over here. I see they set this dress out. They turn the lights on, and this dress that you see sitting over here, this dress was passed down through the generations, and this dress here belonged to Chief Owhi's daughter. And Owhi's daughter, they made this dress, and she traveled, and I'm not sure which one of his daughters it was, because Charlie Nason, their daughter, they wore this dress down to the signing of the Treaty of 1855. Wow. And so it's been in our family since that time. And it's been passed down, and Mom took care of it. And over the years, last time she loaned that dress out, Mom took good care of it. She was really fussy about us kids there, the daughters and the girls that wore that dress, on how they took care of it. But she loaned this dress out to a gentleman that was, now I just drew that blank again. He was a musician, and he went back east to play in Madison Square Garden, I believe it was. He was a flute player. And he borrowed this dress, and when it come back, they kind of broke it up, and they didn't take care of it. They got it, and Mom was upset she would never loan it out after that, because the old ladies told her to keep it, to make sure it stayed in the family and passed down. And over the years, I've let my daughters, my niece, if you go, Arnold's oldest sister worked at Rocky Reach Dam. She was the greeter there at Rocky Reach for years. And you'll see a photo up there of this woman standing on the rocks overlooking the Columbia River. And she's wearing that dress. That's my niece. That's Arnold's oldest sister. My daughter Sia my daughter Shekinah has wore it. I've let some of my kids wear it different times for special functions and special occasions. And then I got worried as things were going. It's really hard to keep some of these artifacts and keeping people going. And there's always people now trying to keep them from getting stolen. It's getting to be harder and harder and harder. So I got nervous, and then I got to thinking, well, when you try to maintain this, it's like some of the baskets, you'll see some of the baskets and stuff that I made a decision. I talked with Mom, and Mom's was passed down to us to keep all this stuff together. And the reason she didn't, the old lady told Mom, you take care of that dress, because her daughter, who was married up into the Caldwell Reservation, Mrs. Long Jim, she got the drink, and they was afraid they was going to sell this stuff off for money. And so she told Mom, here, you take this, you take care of it, you keep this stuff together. So that dress has been, that's how we took care of it. And then she told me, you take care of that. So now so I thought, well, the problem was, and she wanted all of her grandkids and everything, if they be able to see it, to do it. Well, if you got it put away in a trunk, nobody can really enjoy it. And they don't. So I made the decision to put some of this down, and I looked for years. I tried to go to different museums. I found out that it was really hard because they always want to take ownership on it. And I was able to work with the museum here, and Keith Esslinger helped me put this deal, and that's why it's housed in this museum here, because they set it up so that if anything happens to this museum or something, the property will come back to the family before it's sold off or traded to some other, because a lot of museums, and the reason they take this stuff, they classify us as Plateau Indians, and they put us all in one lump sum. The Kittitas people, or the Peshawanapan people, and the Wenatchee people, the Eniat people, they all had their own language. They had their own dialect. They spoke a whole different language. Some of it might have been overlapped. Some of the same, it might have been the same word, but they pronounced it different. So it would just be by the way they put the accent on the word. But unfortunately, when we was taking our families and we was taken to reservations, taken to the missions and stuff, we could no longer speak that language. My mother spoke 12 different dialects. Her brother spoke 14 because he spent a lot of time on it. So he learned a lot of the coastal language. And of course, the universal language for all these different people was the Chinook jargon or Chinook language. But you know, for years, our language disappeared because our families couldn't speak it. And it's very unfortunate because really in order to learn to speak that language, the best time to learn it was when you was young and when you didn't have any inhibitions. Now, Mom, I grew up during the time period when it wasn't cool to be Indian. And Mom told me, she said, I'm not going to teach you the language. Because she says, in order for you to survive, you're going to have to learn the white man's way. But she said, I want you to learn white man's way. I want you to know your father's family, which I did. I've got a large Italian family, and they were the best family he could ever have because they'd always come out to help put up hay, do stuff, help Mom out, whatever it was. They was always there. So I was very blessed. But what she always told me too is don't ever forget where your heart's at. She taught me where my heart was at. That's why I identify with my roots. I may be half, as most people, because I went through, I was one of these times during that time period. He was going through a phase where you had full-bloods that didn't really care for half-breeds. You had white people that didn't care for half-breeds either because they thought he was Indian. So you really didn't fit anywhere. Except I found out I did belong to a different band. I belonged to the Wapaho band. And for years, I didn't think there was any other Wapaho deal. You know what? In about the last 5 years, I met more Wapahos. So we got a large band. A lot of them. And they're pretty neat guys. neat people. So there are some other half Indian, half Italians out there. But it's fun. We could joke about it. But the people, I've always felt blessed to be living in this valley. Because I was fortunate enough when I went to school, I had a lot of people, a lot of teachers that encouraged me to be who I was, and don't change from that. I'm just who I am. You was here for a purpose. Mom told me my purpose when I was born was to take care of her. And she made me make certain promises. I guess before I left off, when we was talking about cemeteries, I fulfilled every promise that I made Mom, except for one. And I plan on trying to get that done within the next year. I should probably go back. To this, the cemetery. This family cemetery is located on our present day home. But we also had another cemetery located out where the Catholic cemetery is located at now. In 1966 was my senior year, and it was a hot summer day. I went into class, and I can remember it very well. It was very clear. It was hot, and I was having to take a history class, and it was a repeat class because I didn't make it through the first time. He liked me so much he invited me back. And it was John Trainer, who was the teacher. And John was probably one of the nicest guys you want to know, but he had this monotone voice. And he taught, and in this history class, he wanted you to memorize every date that there was. 1888 was this. 1887 we had this and this. And his test always, and it included dates. And it was kind of boring. And we sitting in this classroom, and it was good and hot. And I thought, I'd come into class, and it was always right after lunch. And so I was always having a hard time. I'd get in there, and I usually start to fall asleep, and John was always waking me up. So this one day I walked in there, it was right after lunch, it was almost 1 o'clock, it was good and hot. And all of a sudden I walked in the door, and then I walked in the door and went to sit down. I didn't quite get to sit down, and something struck me. It says, "You better go to the cemetery." And I thought, what the heck? It said, "Just go to the cemetery." I heard this voice talking to me. So I walked out the door, went out to my car. Actually, it wasn't my car, it was my mother's. And I just happened to drive to school that day and not ride the bus. And I drove out to the cemetery, to the Catholic church. And I got out there to where the Catholic church was, or the cemetery was at, pulled up just in time to see this big bulldozer going right through our family cemetery that was located there. And it was fenced off. It had a woven wire fence around it. And there was over 55 graves in there. And some of those old stones, that Louis Winwhitey's in there. Grandma's in, great-grandma's in there. All these people that for years I heard stories about, they're buried in there. The Kittitas people, they're buried in that cemetery. Some of the old stones, Captain Winwhitey, the stories I heard about, he was buried in there. There was a hand-carved stone in there. From the time I was a baby until I was gone, every Memorial Day we cleaned that cemetery. And after every deal of our family, we was always taking pictures. I can't find one picture of that cemetery. I've looked through all of our pictures. Arnold taking pictures. He took pictures of everything, including little ants and stuff crawling. We can't find one picture of that cemetery. I work for the Department of Agriculture, and they fly this county once a year. Every aerial photo that I went for that area was missing. It always come up missing. Because I know that if I could find an aerial photo, that I could probably locate exactly where that cemetery was at, because it had 4 railroad corner posts, and the only thing that they didn't change when they leveled that to add that new piece of ground into the Catholic cemetery was the south boundary fence. If I can measure from, if I can find a photo so we could see those railroad corner posts, I can measure from that south boundary fence over and then up to where those posts are and locate that plot. When I came, they told me, I was so mad I wanted to kill that cat driver, but I wanted to just jump up there, and then second thought I wanted to jump on that cat and just run over and push over a bunch of stones on the other side. The problem is my Catholic family's all over there. My dad's buried over there. All my aunts and uncles on the Catholic side, they're all over on that side of the fence. So that wasn't going to work either. But over the years, I've tried to get that, and all I want to do, from what I remember, that piece of property that the county, it was the county had the property. And come to find out, just in the last year or so, I found out that that piece of property the county had used to be a trust piece of property, and it belonged to my mother. And I'm not sure how they lost that, how the county ended up with that land, because Mom never sold anything. I don't know whether they just took that piece of ground at some time or anything, but it was trust property at one time, and I found out it belonged to my mother. So, but that piece of ground had before they started leveling it had a big dip in it. And the county had it, and right at the front there was a bunch of pauper graves for people that couldn't afford to pay for a funeral and stuff. They buried them in there. There was a bunch of babies. They left some of those graves. But on the way down to the south end of it, there was when you walked down the field, there was a big dip. You know, and then it come up, and then it was flat. And that cemetery was located right in, just around where that dip was at, kind of, I think, from my memory. And I took Mom down there before, because she was crying and stuff. I called the agency, and they told me that had been surveyed and plotted, and those stones and everything was going to be put back. I got drafted, went to Vietnam. I come back. It was Memorial Day. Mom's crying, making all kinds of fuss. So I wrote some letters to the editor, and at that time, Joe McManamy was the on the council or commissioners. He went. They didn't do it. He went and placed 3 stones out there, and the reason he did that is the 3 stones that he placed out there was people that worked for the McManamy Ranch. They worked for Joe, and he knew who they were. And where they placed the stones is right over along where they planted a whole bunch of juniper trees and stuff. But I took Mom there and said, that's not the right location. She felt the location of where that cemetery was at is where they put that big cross. And our concern is they're putting new graves in that area. And all I want to do is to be able to find that 4-corner post. Last year we put up in our cemetery at Cashmere, where my mom's bunch of family, her brother, one brother that was there in Cashmere was buried and stuff. Same thing happened. They tipped over a bunch of the stones. They covered over it. But we placed a stone up there last year with all the names of those people on that stone, so that families could go there and recognize where their family members used to be or was buried at one time. That's the one thing that I haven't got done. And I was working with Catholic Church. All I'm asking for is I want to put the names of those people, and I'm forgetting some of those names. I had the names, but I think I can find some. Some of them are the people you see here, but I've got even more pictures of some of those people that were there. So that's the one promise I never fulfilled for Bob yet, is getting that taken care of so that those people weren't forgotten. So this is about all I have to say, and I guess the reason I said before, I read somewhere, and I've heard somebody say that you die 2 deaths in life. You die the first death when everybody forgets who you are, and the second, they put you in when you die. If everybody forgets to pass those stories on, that's your second death. So, in order to keep the stories of my people in the valley, the Kittitas Valley here alive, I'd like to get a marker put out there so the families may come and see where they're at, or at least put flowers there. But that's the only thing that I have to say. If there's any questions, it's open. Yes.
What year was your people granted the allotment back in?
I forget what year that census was taken in. Randy, you know the date? What?
No, I don't. Not for the Kittitas. The Allotment Act itself was 1887.
Yeah, so it was around 1887,
Okay.
I think.
Right.
I think that's when we found the census here.
Oh, okay, thank you.
At the time of the treaty, can you estimate the population in the valley here?
Well, at the time of the treaty and stuff, when I was doing some of the research, I think in Kittitas Valley, there was a huge encampment out at that time of over 8,000, close to 10,000 Indians living out in the Little Caribou. And up in the Natum, there was probably 300-400 Indians living there. And in the Thorpe, there was, on the old Highway 10, there was a bunch of Indians. I mean, there was a big encampment there because that's where a lot of their allotments. And there was another mission that was located in Monashtash, and there's a whole bunch of people that was living there. There was some, and like I said, there was a large population of Kittitas. I don't know exact numbers. All I know is that Mom and them told me that there was a lot of people living there. Because actually, part of the Kittitas, there was people living in the SWAT. I know one of the family members, it was the Bob family. She married a McCready. She was born right there where Mary Burke lived, in that house. She was born right there in the SWAT. And when they come back, the Masterson family had built their house there. Of course, Pat Burke, Mary was there, but Pat Burke, my mother raised Pat Burke. The story between Pat was kind of ongoing. Pat's mother, when Pat was born, she didn't have enough milk to feed Pat, and so Mom offered to, she was nursing one of my brothers, and so she nursed Pat, so that he'd have enough milk. And that's how we knew Pat Burke. And it was my brother Johnny and Jerry Sanders that got Pat introduced to Mary out at the Grange Hall out on Highway 10. That's the story that I was told. So, yeah.
So Al, were you all, the whole tribe here for how many thousand years, or?
I don't know how many thousand years. I don't know. Before me, I mean, they were here. I don't know the length of time that. My history starts in 1947.
Right.
I have to go back to my nephew. He was ahead of me, and he fills in some of the blanks there, and his sisters, he was a little ahead of that. And Randy, it's like Randy and I was saying, we go around and it's like a piece of a puzzle. You're trying to put all your history together. Oh, where does this fit in at? We spent all afternoon telling stories and different things coming up and looking at pictures and saying, oh, what was that guy's name? We spent an hour trying to remember a person's name. We could describe him, we could see him, but we couldn't put a name to him.
Is there any kind of like a government in the tribe?
Yeah, they had their own leadership deal. That's where you had
So
your
was
chiefs.
Ida up in there?
Well, I don't know whether she was an elder and leader, she was just one of the elders, she was just one of the members of the tribe. She didn't serve on council and thing, that wasn't her job. You know, one thing about our culture I was always told is, you had a purpose in life, you just had to find out what that purpose was, and that's where you went. You know, I was always told not all of us was meant to be a leader in a fashion where you would be a chief of the main tribe. Some of us were meant to be hunters, gatherers, food gatherers. Women folks were used to be root takers or something like that. So you had to find your own niche, but you had a job and everybody had to work in order to survive.
Alan,
Yeah.
it looks to me like we have a whole room full of friends,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that there are two things that still need to be done. And I'd like to know, how can we help fulfill your promise to your mom with respect to having the stone set?
Well, I guess our first order is still is just to try and find that location of that cemetery, the exact location, just so we can try and put the corner, so I know that that's where all. If the 4 stones or the 3 stones that Joe McManamy set, if that's the actual area, then there should be at least 55 more people buried in that area. And if that's the case, those trees and stuff are gonna be planted over the top of some of them. But all I'm asking for is just to find the same location so we can plot that off, so as that cemetery field, as they're putting more and more people out there, that they're not putting bodies on top of our family people.
And my second one was with respect to your land. After we came to visit you, as you know, I went into the BLM website to look up these Kittitas allotments, and none of them were in trust from the original patent. And I wondered why, because many of those Wenatchee and up into Peshashton and Dryden, they're in trust, and they're still in, some of those are still in trust.
The reason most of those weren't in trust, as near as I can tell and found out, was because the people here couldn't read or write, most of them just had an X. When the people filled the paperwork out for the allotments, they checked that white homestead thing, and then it automatically took it out of trust. And that's how, and then of course in the 50s, our trust from, like our allotments that were uptown and stuff there in the 50s, a lot of those were taken under eminent domain. They just took it, like the college took a bunch of our allotments up there for future development, for future growth, and they just took that under eminent domain. For better use of land, they said.
So you mentioned to us that the only fix for that is going to be an act of Congress. And again, I'm speaking tonight about this to this room full of friends, because to get that act of Congress could use some help and support when a bill gets written. And on our way over here, we were discussing that, because we too are looking at the legacy time of life and that historic wrong of all of these Kittitas allotments being never protected. Your dad paying the taxes. The final thing that needs to be taken care of is to have that put back. And one of the things that is necessary for that is for the good neighbors not to object. It's going to be very important for all the people in the valley to support you. And I'd like to see that happen. And we will give you any help we can on both of those projects, including financial, drafting, lobbying, whatever is necessary. So, good to see you
Thank
again.
you.
Becky Scholl, the geology and what geology and anthropology and those departments at Central, there are brilliant people at the university, and that might be some kind of thing that you could get some help
We've been
identification
trying
of,
to use that resource, but we keep running into roadblock, I've been using some of that, but I
good.
think this next year, my focus is gonna be on that, cause I wanna get that done, cause like I said, I don't know how much time I have. Randy, you gonna say something?
So not in regard to this, go ahead, finish off that.
No, go ahead.
I've got a question.
Okay, go ahead. Question.
I just want you to share with the people here the story about the cannons in Owhi Gardens when the cavalry came through.
Okay. Back, when the cavalry was going after Chief Joseph, they were gonna try and cut Chief Joseph off before he made it to Canada. They dispatched a cavalry unit out of what we used to call Mole, but that's Fort Simcoe. The Indians at that time called Fort Simcoe Mole. They dispatched this unit, this big, a full detachment of military people, foot soldiers, horse soldiers, and artillery pieces. And they came across from Molo, about a White Swan, come across the Weenass down into where my mom's aunt and them lived, across that trail, coming across the Weenass, camped at the allotments there where my aunt and uncle lived at. Then the next day they left there and made it up to the Nanum. And they camped in our big hayfield that we have there in the Nanum. And it was late in the fall, it was actually this time of year, November. It was closer to Thanksgiving, almost probably a week or so from Thanksgiving, what Mom was saying, given that calendar time. They got there, they set up camp in that field, and they had all their tents and the soldiers, and they had these artillery pieces. Well, during the night, it snowed about 5 feet of snow. And they were planning on going up over the Mission Ridge, or up over the Clockham, and down the other side, and out towards Nispelum. Well, when it snowed quite a bit of snow, over 5 feet. They decided they couldn't pull these artillery pieces. So they left these 4 or 5 artillery pieces back with a small group of soldiers to guard them, and the rest of them headed out over the mountain horseback, and some of them walking, trudging through the snow, and headed up over towards Wenatchee and out that way. Well, sometime during the night, Charlie Nason and a bunch of his young guys, they came in there with horses and ropes, and they roped these cannons and drug them off. And they drug these cannons off, and at that time that lower piece where the gardens was located and stuff was part of our allotments. And down in that area, there's some areas in there that it had real deep soil. There's no rock in it. And they dug these big deep holes, and they drug these cannons into these holes, and they buried them. And they covered it all up and stuff. Well, when I moved back home to take care of my mom, and got up there, all of a sudden one day this older gentleman, about 90 years old, he was over 90, he showed up at my house, and he got out, and I believe his name was Charlie Bragg. And Charlie Bragg was the guy that traded Charlie Nason out of that piece of allotment for the white horse. And Charlie come up there, and he says, I know where those cannons, at least one cannon is. He says, I hooked it with a plow. And he says, I never said anything, because I knew, he says, I didn't, just left it there. So they could still be there or not. I always wanted to go down and find it, but it's one of those things I never made it down. I might do that one of these days, just run a metal detector down there or something, just so I could prove that story. But that's what was passed down through our family. I guess I didn't tell you that mission, or that first school, when the wars broke out up there, when the war started, that first mission school was up in Anna, got burnt down, and when they was telling them, I said, yeah, it was probably our family, they burned it down. But that's it. I guess that's about it. I used up my time, I think.
I wonder if I could ask you one short thing about, when you went to that section where it said more relatives,
Oh,
you
yeah.
talked about a man named Bill Yasnich.
Yeah. He was,
Did he marry somebody from Chicago? Is that what we were talking about?
yeah, he married my niece, Janice, or Arnold's oldest sister.
Oh,
Of course,
well, my name is Lloyd Pinkham, and we come from, well, we're part Nespers and
Yeah.
Yakima, and we come from the Juwalee side.
Yeah.
And my brother was Joe J. Pinkham.
right, I know.
Well, Bill Yasnich used to work at our, we had a, you know, I remember a long time ago, we had at our longhouses, we had school teachers that would come there and try to help our young people learn the Chiapo language, you know?
Yeah,
And Bill Yasnich was one of those teachers.
yes, he was a teacher.
Yeah, I would just
That's
shocked
it.
you when you had a picture of him.
Yeah, Joe J. Pinkham, he used to come up here and one night, he always had a crush on my sister Joanne.
I believe it. Thank you.
Him and Walt Bassett,
Yes.
Johnson Maniac.
I tell the gentleman, Bill Yasinich is still alive and doing kind of good up there in Wenatchee.
Yeah,
So he's in his 90s now.
yeah.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to see him, or if I could go see him, thank him for helping us people.
Yeah, he lives there in Wenatchee. And his son, one of his sons, Mike, he lives there in Wenatchee also.
Yeah, he could kind of speak our language like, you know, like the Chinook jargon we
Yeah.
called it.
Yeah,
But he really was good at it.
that's good to hear.
You tell the government, they give you your stuff back, you give them their cannons back.
That's a good deal. Maybe we better go find it. Make a trade. Okay, I guess that's about all I have to say. When we was talking this afternoon, one of the headstones that was placed out there that Joe placed, all it has on it was Antwine. And so I was asking Randy about Antwine, because there's an Antwine road that some of our family members up around Lake Chelan, up out of Lake Chelan, when you're headed over towards the top. When you go out of Lake Chelan, you'll see an Antwine road. And I asked Randy, I said, Randy, is that Antwine the same Antwines as the family that was up there? And he says, yes. He said, the Antwine that was down here, his first name was Johnny Antwine. And his allotments they were located up there out of Aswell. And their allotments got taken away at Aswell. And when their allotment, when they come back and somebody had homesteaded on their allotment, Johnny Antwine and his wife moved down here to the Kittitas Valley because they had some relatives down here, and they happened to be out towards the McManamy Ranch, and that's where he was living at. And his name was Johnny Antwine. And I didn't know his first name, but I thought I'd just share that because that's who's out there with the cemetery.
Huh?